Hello everyone, welcome back to Anatomy Group Tutoring. So I have prepared a slideshow with pictures of all of the different bones of the appendicular skeleton, and I'm going to go over them and go over each of their respective features of each bone so that we can kind of review it together. And again, these videos are made so that you can go over them multiple times and just try to remember as much as you can. I will be back on the 13th, I believe, the Thursday. Yes, the 13th, that Thursday, I will be back in person with my regularly scheduled group tutoring sessions. Sorry again for the inconvenience of being online, but I'm still trying my best to give you guys all the information I can while I'm not physically there. So let me start off. Going to share my screen so that you can see, and then here we go. So again, as I said, I'm going to be starting with the appendicular skeleton. We've already gone over the gross and microscopic anatomy of bone and the axial skeleton. So now we're going over the appendicular skeleton. Some basic information about the appendicular skeleton is that you have two different girdles and two different limbs. So you have the pectoral girdle and the pectoral and the pelvic girdle, which are going to be connecting the upper and lower limbs to the axial skeleton. So to start off, we're going to start with the pectoral girdle, which consists of two bones. So you have the clavicle and the scapula, and these are going to be the two bones of the pectoral girdle, but they're each very important to keep everything in its place. So to start off, we're going to go over the clavicle, and there are only two features that you really need to remember for the clavicle, and that's the acromial end and the sternal end. So the acromial end of the clavicle is going to be the lateral end of the clavicle, and the sternal end will be the medial end of the clavicle. The sternal end, as shown here, the sternal end will connect to the sternum or the manubrium of the sternum, and the acromial end will connect to the acromion of the scapula. So just remembering the acromial attaches to the acromion, and the sternal connects to the sternum. And then the scapula is the next bone, and this only has four different features that you need to focus on. So to start off, we have the spine of the scapula, and you can see here, this is the right scapula, and it's the posterior aspect. So you can see that the spine goes from the medial end of the scapula all the way out to the acromion of the on the lateral end of the scapula. And as you can see here, the spine is going to be more posterior, and there's going to be that gap between the spine of the scapula and the rest of the scapula. And this is going to allow for more space for other structures. And so it's important to kind of see it from multiple angles, as that will make it easier to remember these different structures and where they are when you actually are seeing the physical bones. And so the spine goes from, again, from the medial end to the lateral end. And on the lateral end, that is where you have the acromion. And so this is where the acromial end of the clavicle is going to attach to. And the, I believe, okay, yeah, it's just where the clavicle attaches to. Um, yeah. And then you have the coracoid process, which you can see here. You can see here as well, which is a kind of like hook-like process that will attach to the biceps brachii muscle. And then you have the glenoid cavity, which is going to be where the humerus will attach to. It's very similar to another structure in the pelvic girdle, where it is a deep depression that will allow for the head of the humerus to be able to attach to somewhat like this, and it can move around because of the type of joint it is. So that is it for the pectoral girdle. So now we'll move on to the upper limbs, which are your arms. So the major bone of the upper limbs is the humerus. And so there are a lot of different structures on the humerus that you need to know. So to start off, we have the head of the humerus. This is the very large, almost, it's a cylindrical structure. It kind of looks like a ball. And because it is very smooth. So that is the head of the humerus. And then as you can see in the anterior view, this is where you can see the greater and the lesser tubercle in very good detail. You can also see it from the posterior view, but you can really differentiate the two on the anterior view as you can't see it posteriorly. And so the greater tubercle is going to be lateral and the lesser tubercle is going to be medial. And so it's easy to see as the greater one is a lot bigger of a process, um, and then the lesser one is a lot smaller. And then the next section is the deltoid tuberosity. And so this is going to be a rough structure that's going to allow for the, which one? I think it's yeah, the deltoid muscle. Um, it's going to be where the deltoid muscle attaches. And you also, when you can feel the physical bone, you can feel the roughness. And so that's going to allow for better attachment for that muscle. And then you have the rest of the structures are all at the distal end of the humerus. And so to start off, we'll start with the capitulum, which this is another cylindrical-like structure. And this is going to be um, what articulates with the radius. And then you have the trochlea. So the trochlea, it looks almost like a hoof in this section. Um, it's a very specific shape to the bone. So uh, it should be relatively easy to see where the trochlea is in comparison to the other features. And the trochlea is going to be what connects to the ulna, specifically the olecranon process. Here you can see there's the olecranon fascia, which is where a large section of the olecranon will be able to kind of go into as it's a hinge joint, so it's the joint of your elbow, and so obviously you can move your elbow like this, and so that is because you have the space for the olecranon process to move like this over the trochlea. And so then you have the medial and medial and lateral epicondyles, and the lateral epicondyle you can see it is posterior to the capitulum. Um, and then here you can see it a little bit more clearer as the capitulum is not there. And then you have the medial epicondyles, which very similar structure, but they're a little bit smaller and they're on the medial side of the humerus. There's no specific function of the lateral medial epicondyles, so you just need to remember where they are and what they look like. Next, we have the radius and the ulna. So the ulna, they each have a decent amount of features that you need to remember. So the radius, you have the head of the radius, which you can see is going to be at the proximal end of the radius. And then you have the radial tuberosity, which is a little bit lower. So it's a little distal to it. And you can see it's a slight bump in the radius that is going to be very close, if not connected to the ulna. And then you have the styloid process, which is going to be this structure here, very similar to the styloid process of the um, temporal bone. It's kind of like a tooth-like structure, almost like a pyramid. And you can see it a little bit more here. It kind of looks like a tooth. Um, and so the styloid process is going to be a site of attachment for the ligaments of the wrist. And so it's just allowing more surface area for those ligaments to attach. Um, and yeah, so that's all the features of the radius that you need to know. And then for the ulna, you have the radial notch, which is right here. And so it's going to be right below the olecranon or the olecranon process, it's going to be right about here where they connect, right where the proximal radial ulnar joint is, because that the radial notch is going to be a small structure that is going to allow for the head of the radius to attach and be smooth against the ulna. Then you have the Old process, which I mentioned earlier, which kind of looks like the head of a snake from both the front and behind, specifically like a king cobra. It kind of looks like the head of a cobra. And so you have the Old process, and then in the middle area of the Old process, on the anterior side, you can see because yeah, this is the anterior. Yes. Sorry. So this is the anterior side, and you can see in the middle you have the trochlear notch, and this is because it's going to attach to the trochlea to create the hinge joint, so that you can move your forearm and at the elbow. And then you have another styloid process. You have the ulnar styloid process, which again is a little kind of tooth-shaped section of the bone that is going to be part of the distal radial ulnar joint. Um, and then you have the coronoid process, which is the coronoid process is right here. It's going to be almost exactly um, distal to the trochlear notch. And this is going to be where it connects to and surrounds the trochlea of the humerus. So next we have the carpals, metacarpals, and the phalanges. So the carpals, you have the hemicapitate, trapezoid, and trapezium on the distal row, and the proximal row, you have the pisiform, triquitrum, lunate, and scaphoid. And so those are going to be your 8 carpal bones, and those are going to attach to the ulna and the radius. And then you have your metacarpal bones. And so they'll start with one at the pollex, your pollex, which is your thumb. So you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then above or distally to those, you have your proximal, middle, and distal phalanges. And so those are going to be from the proximal to the distal end of your fingers. And then next we have the pelvic girdle. And so this is technically one bone, but there are 3 sections of the bone. So you have the coxal or the hip bone. And so you have 3 sections, and I'm going to use this image to show the 3 sections. So you have the ilium, which is the largest section that's going to attach to the sacrum. You have the pubis and the ischium. And I'll go over those structures and their various features here. So the ilium is going, as you see, you have the sacroiliac joint, which is one feature that you'll need to remember, which is basically, it's just where the sacrum meets the iliac, or the ilium. Then you have the iliac crest, which hopefully you can see here. The iliac crest is going to be that rounded, smaller, or thinner area of the ilium. And then you have the iliac fascia, which is going to be that depression of the hip bone, or the iliac, or ilium, sorry. And then lastly, you have the acetabulum. And so the acetabulum, technically, it is made up of all 3 types of bones. So you have the acetabulum here. So it has technically part of the pubis, the ischium, and the ilium all connected. But for this, we're going to put it with the ilium. So the acetabulum, very similar to the glenoid cavity, is going to be where your femur attaches to the hip bone, and that's where you're going to have your hip joint. Then we have your pubis, which you can see is around this, and the only feature you need to remember for the pubis is the pubic symphysis, which is the medial part of the pubis that is connected with cartilage. And then lastly, you have the ischium. And so you can see, I believe you can see all of them here. Okay, maybe you don't. I'll go to the next one. But you have the ischium here, and so this one you can't really see, but you have the ischial tuberosity, which is below the acetabulum, and this is going to be where you sit. And this will be really helpful to look at the models to see how you sit. Um, so these are going to be what's going to actually be closest to whatever structure you're sitting on. Like for me, I'm sitting in a chair, so the ischium is going to be closest to the actual chair. Obviously, you still have your muscles and other tissues that are going to be in between the ischium and the seat or wherever you're sitting on itself, but it's going to be the closest part that is going to allow you to sit down. And then you have the um, let me make sure I'm pronouncing this correctly. Obtur obturator foramen. And so this is going to be the big hole that is in your hip bone, and it's going to allow for your blood vessels and your nerves to pass through to your lower limbs. So it is a very important structure. And then next we have the lower limbs, and so this consists of your femur, tibia, fibula, your patella, and your tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. So to start off, we have the femur and the patella. So the femur, there are only four different structures that you need to remember or features that you need to remember. So you have the head of the femur, and you don't need to know the neck, but you have the head and then the neck of the femur, which is how you'll really be able to tell the difference between the femur and the humerus. The humerus has the head, does not really have a neck. I mean, technically it does have a neck. It has a surgical neck, but it's not as pronounced as the neck of the femur. And so that will be one, along with plenty of other features, that's going to be one way to tell the femur apart from the humerus, as well as just the size. When you are actually looking at the physical bones, you'll be able to see the femur is a lot bigger than the humerus because it's going to be supporting a lot more weight. Your humerus doesn't need to really support much weight, but your femur is going to be supporting a lot of weight because that's what's holding your body up. So it's a lot larger. And so you have the head, the neck, and then you have your greater and lesser trochanters. The greater is going to be medial, or not medial. The greater trochanter is going to be lateral, and the lesser trochanter is going to be medial, very similar to the humerus. And you can see here, it's a very different structure compared to the um, humerus, where you have the greater and lesser tubercles. Um, the tubercles are very different from the trochanters. The trochanters are a lot, they are a lot more pronounced than the trochanters, or they're a lot more pronounced than the tubercles, as they are trochanters. And this one almost looks like a tooth, not really a tooth, but you can kind of see it. Uh, but it's almost like a little hook shape all the way through, or not hook, but hopefully you guys are kind of getting what I'm saying, which I think some of you will understand kind of what I'm trying to say. Um, it's hard to kind of put it into words sometimes, but the last structure that you need to remember for the femur is the patellar surface, which is going to be down here. It's going to be the distal part of the femur, and it's going to be the anterior part of the distal femur. And this patellar surface is where the patella is going to lay to create the joint of your knee. Next, we'll have the fibula and tibia. So the fibula, I believe, only has one feature that you need to remember, for mine, it was grouped in with the tibia, so I'll try to make sure to make that distinction. So with the tibia, you have the lateral and medial condyles. So you can see the lateral condyle here and the medial condyle here, which you can see on the medial condyle, you can see on both sides. You can kind of see where the lateral condyle is on the posterior side, but it's a little more difficult to see. And those are going to line up with the medial and lateral condyles of the femur, which I don't believe you need to know the medial and lateral condyles of the femur, but you can see it here. You can kind of see they're kind of pronounced almost like your knuckles are, kind of if you think like this, if you have like your two fingers and you can see your knuckles kind of like that. It kind of is similar with the medial and lateral epicondyles, and so they're going to connect with the um, lateral and medial condyles of the tibia. Then you have the tibial tuberosity, which is right here, and that is where your um, patellar ligament is going to attach. And then you have the crest of the tibia, which is not shown here, at least not highlighted here, but I would assume it's going to be the thinnest pronounced area of the tibia, which I would assume is going to be probably about here, but I could be wrong, so be good to double check it. And then you'll have the medial malleolus, which is going to be part of the tibia, and then the lateral malleolus is going to be part of the fibula. And so these two structures, excuse me, these two structures are what's going to be the ankle. So the medial will obviously be the medial side of the ankle, and the lateral will be the lateral side of the ankle, but that is where your ankle is. So if you ever kind of look at your ankle and touch your ankle, you're likely seeing the lateral malleolus as that kind of pronounced part of your ankle. And then lastly, we have the tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. So your tarsals, you only have 7 tarsals, whereas you have 8 carpals. So your tarsals, you have the calcaneus, you have the talus, you have the navicular and cuboid bones, and then you have 3 different cuneiform bones. So you have the medial, intermediate, and lateral cuneiform bones. And so those are your 7 tarsal bones. And then similarly to the carpal or metacarpal bones, you have 1 through 5, and that starts at the hallux and goes to your pinky toe. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then again you have your proximal, middle, and distal. Here on the hallux, you only have the proximal and distal, and the rest you'll have proximal, medial, and distal. And the distal are a lot smaller on the feet. And I believe that is all that you need to know for the appendicular skeleton. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave any comments in, let me stop sharing the screen. Feel free to leave any comments in the comment section of this video. I will try to reply to as many as I can. And you can always reach out to my email. I'll try and put it on the screen here so you can use that as well. And yeah, if you don't have any questions, great. And I will be back on the 13th with my regularly scheduled sessions. And from then on, we should be smooth sailing for the rest of the semester with all the sessions regularly on Tuesday and Thursday at noon. So I'm hoping you guys are all watching these and finding these helpful. This will be the last one for hopefully the last one for this class that's going to be online and not in person. The rest should be in person. So thank you for watching, and I hope this helped you. Feel free to rewatch it to get any more information if you need. And yeah, good luck.